what are some of the most important factors you're looking at from a boots on the ground standpoint, but also finding the perfect camera locations in order to try to get some inventory late summer, early
Yeah,
fall?
it was the same locations. It was modifying where I was putting them based on the habitat more than the terrain than anything. So it was thicker areas, but it's that same. It's the north facing, like anywhere there's cool, dense cover, places like that. That's the places I was looking to start with. North facing, drainages and things like that. That was where I was starting out at, and it was just kind of adjusting off of that, kind of thinking less about the terrain and more about the habitat that was around it. But I like the north facing slopes in the summertime, north facing drains, anywhere you have water. If you have spring fed drainages, I'm gonna start there, try to pick those out and put cameras in those areas, or see if there's even sign. Like I'm looking in the mud, the creek bottoms, the branch bottoms, and seeing if you got tracks, and just kind of going off of that. But it doesn't matter what time of year that you're running cameras or you're trying to find deer. It's finding that type of terrain that has the thick cover as well. So it's a combination of both. You can't just have just the cool canopy and then not have any cover. There's just not going to be deer there at all. They may move through it, but they're not going to be staying there, and you're not going to get enough periodic enough to start patterning them during the summer. So it's still the terrain, the cool areas with water and food really close because they don't want to move very far, especially the larger bucks, because you got to get everything really, really. The more compacted you can get all that within an area, the quicker you can get on like a mature buck.
So I want to go over some terminology real quick. You said north facing slopes, north facing drainages. What do you mean by north facing slopes and north facing drainages for people that don't understand what that is?
Well, I mean they're just facing the north. Like the higher elevation will be to the south, the lower elevation will be to the north. The same thing with the drainages. The open end of the drainage is going to be to the north. The higher elevation where it goes up in elevation is going to be to the south, or southwest, southeast. However, it didn't matter. They don't have to be directly. I think there's a lot of people that think it's got to be facing just north. And you hardly ever get any drainage that's just running north south. So anything that kind of tucks itself back into that south end where the elevation is to the south or southwest or southeast, and you can get water in that drainage and thick cover around. Those are the places I'm going to pick out first, and especially that canopy cover. Like if it's open hardwoods, probably not going to be in it. It's unless it's super thick, like high canopy, high thick. I don't know what you probably know the term for whatever they call the canopy thickness, but an open hardwood canopy is not gonna work as well as one that's like really closed off and really just shuts that light down.
At what height are you talking about with this canopy? Are you talking about a canopy that's 7 feet off the ground, or does it matter if the canopy's 50 feet off the ground?
I mean, I'm talking mostly mature. So the mature it's going to have a mature canopy, and then it's also going to have that ground layer canopy as well. Like it's not going to, you may not have much understory, but you're going to have a ground layer canopy, maybe an open air, like mid-story, and then the upper story canopy is going to be, pretty closed off.
I got you. So essentially, a mature forest, big trees, 50 to 80 feet tall, whatever they are, and then underneath that canopy, you've got saplings, shrubs, whatever that are maybe 10, 15 feet high, and that's like that understory ground cover.
Yeah, they call it the shrub layer. It's basically everything that's like 8 feet and down. That's going to be a super high stem count. Like we found some this past week that just were covered up with deer, and it was exactly that. It had a real thick canopy overhead. Understory underneath that canopy was really, really open, so you had a lot of airflow, a lot of wind flow in that area. And then the ground story, the shrub layer, 8 foot, was super thick. Like you couldn't walk through, you couldn't see 8, 10 feet in front of you, and it was just covered with deer. And that's just something when you find areas like that, that's where you're going to find the deer this time of year, because you got to think that canopy layer that's up there, especially if you're dealing with like flat ground. That upper canopy area almost serves like a buffer zone for wind flow. So they can get under there, and it's suppressing all the scent. So if anything gets in there, it's almost like it just works its way through that upper story. So you may not have any wind flow in that area, but 100 yards away, your scent may be carrying that away because it's almost like the whole thing is like its own little climate, if that makes sense.
Interesting.
And I think that's why they use those little wood lots.
Yeah.
Those little areas like that, you know.
Just to give you an example, I walked right past the deer, and it waited until I got about 10 yards away before it blew out. I had to have walked within 10 feet of it, and it never jumped up until it knew I was far enough away for it to bounce, but I never saw it.
Interesting. So, and when we're talking about the whole north-facing slopes, the multiple layers of the treetop canopies, again, that sub-canopy layer with like the shrubs, saplings, and then the mature timber canopy, it's all about low light conditions, kind of keeping a lot more of the area shaded, so it's not so much a drastic swings of temperature swings. Because again, a big aspect, Shane, kind of like what you're mentioning, is like a place, and you mentioned this, I think, in your seminar at the Mobile Hunters Expo, talking about where a buck can thermoregulate very easily and stay cool in the summertime, correct?
Yep, exactly. That's the same. It's the same thing. They got to stay cool in the summer and warm up in the winter. So they're gonna, wintertime they're gonna stay near an area. They may, if it's really really cold, they're gonna be getting out in the sun at some point in time to thermoregulate. If it's windy, they're gonna be finding really thick areas to kind of bed up into. Same thing during the summer. Their coats are a lot thinner in the summer, so they're more affected with temperatures then. So the hotter they get, they warm up quicker. They also cool down quicker. So if they can get out of the sun real quick and get into that cool shaded area, they're going to cool down quick. So that's the areas that I'm kind of picking out. And if you have, you can have the thickest understory or thickest canopy in the world. If it's wide open on the ground, it just doesn't hold that coolness as much. Wind can come through and push out a cool pocket of air real quick. Whereas if you've got that thick canopy on the ground, that thick understory, that wind just can't move the cool temps as much as they can in like an open forest. So
now, when you say thick canopy on the ground level, you're a taller guy. You're taller than me, Michael, and Andrew. Can you explain, like, visually, how thick are you wanting it on the ground level, kind of like where a deer's at, to kind of hold some of that cooler air, especially in areas with a little bit more moisture?
I like it over my head. Like, if I can reach up and I'm just touching the top of the canopy, which will be like 9 feet canopy height, and I want to be able to if let's say I can just swing my arms out, Yeah.
I wish I could touch
We don't know
9
anything
feet.
about that.
Yeah.
Me and Michael are here like, man, let's get to maybe 8. Oh, if we get on our tiptoes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jump up and get up there.
But yeah, if I at thickness, I don't want to be like if that light was 20 feet away, I don't want to be able to see it.
Okay.
Like it needs to be blocked. So I need a real high stem count. But it doesn't need to be so thick that they can't move through it. But I mean, we've everywhere that I've had really, really success during the summer finding big bucks is just being in that super, super thick. It's almost thicker than it is during the winter, like, way thicker than you would think. Think of the worst pine thicket you could ever think of.
Which this brings us, back like 3 or 4 years ago when I started throwing cameras out on this one particular WMA.
You almost said it, didn't you?
No, I didn't. I've been thinking about it. So, anyways, I started putting them out in more open areas because, you watch a YouTube video and they're basically like, oh, these deer are not going to be in thick areas because they're growing their antlers. They're in velvet. They don't want to mess them up.
No. That might work
No.
early.
Yeah. But, where I found all of the deer was in the thickest thickets you could possibly think of.
And that's why I was actually going to bring that up about your experience in more of that pine country area, Michael, with those SMZs. And you were finding a lot of those deer in the really, really thick, really in the pines where we wouldn't really assume that's where they'd be. I remember one of the spots where you had some of the biggest bachelor group you had.
Right.
And those pines are nasty.
Yeah.
And like in that specific area, because if I remember correctly, it was on the side of a ridge that had been cut that's all grown up in pines, but what made you want to put a camera in that specific spot versus any other trail in there? Is it just like is a game of odds where you're just finding multiple trails to put cameras on?
Well, I cast a broad net because it's around the time that we were listening to like Josh Driver and things like that. So I was putting them in different things. So I wasn't finding them in the more open, areas where the wind was, blowing through and whatnot. I mean, this canopy was like he was saying, like, trees are 80 foot tall, something like that. You can see underneath there pretty good bit. The airflow is decent, but the deer weren't there. Where they were was in the pines, basically 15, 20 foot tall, and you had, it was just thick enough. Like, they had their trails all zigzagging through there, so it's not like, I guess, they had an issue traveling through. But if you was just, one of us, even our height, walking through there, of course, we're having to duck and dodge and everything like that. But they've got enough room to where they could meander through there without any issue. But it's still thick, a lot thicker than you would think.